Hi everyone, my name's Mike and I'm Head of Behavioural Science at Impression. And what I'm going to talk to you today is a little bit about psychology, a little bit about building trust and a little bit about human motivation and how you can use those tools to increase conversions. So something I'm really passionate about, and I say this all the time to clients, is that marketing is psychology. You're dealing with people. You want these people to do something or not do something. So if you're going to make them do this thing you want them to do, you have to motivate them. And so often in digital marketing, because we deal with ones and zeros, GA data, we start to forget that at the end of all of this is actually a person who either likes what you're saying to them or doesn't. So you need to make sure you're getting that right. In terms of what is behavioural science and what is psychology, I suppose it's a study of people through experimentation and research. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to learn why people behave the way they behave and how we can encourage them to do the things we want them to do. In terms of human behaviour, when we want to try and get someone to do something, there's certain sort of facets that we have to have and sort of pieces of information we need to give them in order to get them to do that. Firstly, you have to get their attention. If you are boring and you cannot hold someone's attention, then they're not going to listen to you, they're going to switch you off. Secondly, if they don't trust you because they think you're lying to them or you're manipulating them, they're going to switch you off. Thirdly, if you don't motivate them, they're just going to have other stuff to do. People are busy. If it isn't easy, quick, and straightforward, and they don't quickly understand what the benefit is to them, they're just not going to do it. Understanding. If they don't understand your messaging because it's too complicated or your website has 1 million marketing messages on it, they're not going to take that piece of advice and not going to do it. And finally, memory. People remember how you made them feel. Every single person remembers a bad experience with a company or a brand where it let them down, and they do not purchase often because of it. So we remember how we made to feel. So we need to be conscious of all of these interactions with brands in order to sell to them, or in order to sell to people more effectively. Today we're going to focus a little bit more on trust. So I suppose when we talk about trust, there's kind of a sort of impact of human trust. And what I mean by that is it's two-faceted. So trust is you rely that I'm going to give you what you say you're going to do. And credibility is building onto that, sort of the idea of you're credible within that space, sort of playing back to that EAT plus stuff that we were talking about before. And ultimately, trust is about feeling psychologically safe and comfortable. When you walk into a room or you meet someone for the first time, you get a sense of whether or not that environment is safe, whether or not that person can be trusted. And that's exactly the same with websites. It's exactly the same with your marketing communications. Building psychological trust relies on people feeling comfortable with you, what you do, and building familiarity. Through building familiarity, we can then start to encourage sort of authority. We can position ourselves as being able to have certain skills, being able to meet certain needs. But firstly, you have to have trust, because if you don't have trust, you're not going to get any further. Interestingly, we can impose human trust just by looking at a design of a website. And we can decide how well that website's going to meet our needs or not meet our needs. We can also infer how competent they are, whether or not you'd like to do business with them. And all of that happens in a fraction of a second as soon as you look at that website for the very first time. So consider what your website looks like when people first land on it and think about the landing pages that people are going to end up on. There are lots of different models you can use in order to try and do this. One that we use regularly in our DX team, digital experience team, is mind space. So moving from left to right, you've got to consider who's giving the person the message, because that speaks to how trustworthy they are. What sort of incentives can you give a person to do what you want them to do? And that can be both things like discounts, but also emotional incentives like having a good time. Social norms. So for example, people will copy each other, especially in situations where they don't know what to do. So if your blinds website is difficult, for example, or scary because people don't understand the measurements, but they see lots of people are purchasing the blinds, it makes the blinds website more psychologically safe and therefore increases the number of people who are likely to do it. Defaults. If we don't know what to do, we will go with the thing that we see everyone else doing, and we will go with the most common, most defaulted option. So labeling the thing that you want people to do as the default option will make people do it. Salience. Attention. So like that website before, Ling's Cars, there was a lot of things to pay attention to. And to demonstrate that point, can anyone name me 3 of the cars that were on that website? No. And that's part of it. When so many things pull and fight for our attention, we don't know what to do next. Priming. So you can make people make a decision before they've even got there by effectively giving them cues and setting them up so that the decision is framed a certain way by the time it gets there. This is kind of how paid social advertising works. So you see a brand, you see a picture, some content of it, it starts to build that familiarity, that kind of trust. And later on, you see more of this advertising as it becomes more targeted as you move through the funnel. And eventually, by the time it comes time to make that decision because you're actually in market for that product that's been chasing you around the internet for the past month, it's already pre-decided for you because it's already gotten into that position. And that's the idea of priming effect. So your emotions will control how you perceive things. We've all been in a bad mood and looked at something and just told it to go away because we didn't want to see it in the first place. These are all standard things. Commitments. If we tell people that they said they were going to do something at a time and a date, and we hold them accountable to that, it makes them much more likely to do that thing. You can do that with things like abandoned basket emails, so on and so forth. Ego. You can appeal directly to people's ego, sense of self-entitlement, importance, and all of these good things can encourage people to do what you want them to do. And those are the types of tools that we'd use. Some really quick examples of this are, we can use things like Trustpilot messaging. So people land on a website for the very first time and they haven't heard of you. Trustpilot messaging is kind of a mental shortcut to this is psychologically safe. We can use imageries and familiar layouts. So on bedding websites, for example, if we change the navigation to look like something like Instagram or something that lots of people are used to interacting with, i.e. circles and clickable content, what we're doing is we're playing directly into people's mental models of how websites actually work. By leaning into this, we're making it easy for people to want to interact with us. We can use dopamine to develop what we call system feedback. So basically, when you were at school, you were taught at a very early age that ticks next to your work mean you're doing a good job. You were also taught that ticks mean good means go. How that works is it triggers dopamine in the human brain. Dopamine is a chemical that drives human action. So when you see a little tick next to your word when you put your name in, that tells you that you're doing the right thing. And it makes you continue. By using ticks throughout a process like a complicated checkout, we can encourage more people to take an action. Finally, piece of advice, revamp your value proposition. There are lots and lots of different types of websites out there, and by framing the type of content, by using things like the social trust messaging, by using things like putting people at ease by telling them there's no hidden fees, by making the interaction simpler, by framing all those things we just spoke about earlier, and putting them onto a value proposition, we can substantially increase people's willingness to interact with your website and purchase your product. Finally, firstly, don't take my advice on anything that I've just said. Test it. And the reason I'm telling you to test it is dead simple. If you go out and build a website, an advert, TV campaign, whatever, on just someone's opinion, what you will do is you'll expose yourself to business risk. People lose money when they take other people's assumptions as gospel and invest on them. Lots of bad ideas get heavily funded for this reason. What you should be looking to do is use data and knowledge to build yourself into a point of understanding where the risk is and where the opportunity is. Things like drug companies use meta-experimentation, multiple drug trials for a reason because they need to take the risk out completely. But at the same time, if you're playing around with social media graphics, perhaps a little bit less risky, you might want to look at some competitors. You might want to put it in front of some customers and go, what do you think of that picture? There's levels of scale and investment that you should be looking at depending on how much money is at risk and how much money you can stand to win. You should be testing all of these things. Take these psychological principles I've taught you through today and test them. Find a website, find a piece of marketing collateral, and test some of these principles and see if they work for you. By doing this, what will mean is you'll remove the things that went wrong. The things that could have gone wrong won't have gone live fully, and therefore what happens over time is you will make more money simply because you will remove mistakes. And there's loads of other benefits, like your customers will like you more because you won't be as annoying. Your website will be nicer to use. People will like your brand more. You'll get revenue and more sales out of it. A whole other reason. And also, if you've got a development backlog, like a mile long, like every company in the world has, if you test the things before you build them, if they're bad ideas, you just don't build them. So, takeaways. Behavioural science can boost your conversion rates. User research, understand your audience, get to know them a little bit. Conduct experiments to disprove opinions. Everyone's got an opinion, they're not all correct. Finally, use psychology to influence your audience, whoever they are. And finally, spend time on that first couple of seconds when people first land on your website and they haven't heard of you before, they're not very familiar, and what you say in there is the most important thing you'll probably say to them because it will frame what happens next in that relationship. So put some time thinking about that. Cool, thank you very much.